All right, let's get into it. Today we're looking at a classic detective story that's really this amazing mix of an industrial thriller and a super clever puzzle. It's all about a modern disaster and the one guy who looked at it and saw a crime where everyone else just saw a tragic accident.
So the whole thing kicks off with this huge national tragedy. A brand new, cutting-edge railway bridge, well, it collapses during a routine stress test. And the human cost is just awful and immediate. 12 colonial workers are killed. Their names are barely even mentioned, They just become a number in the official reports.
And right away, this sets up this central question for the whole story. Was this just a catastrophic but, understandable technical screw-up? Or was it something way more sinister? A crime that was perfectly designed to look like one?
Well, in the chaos right after the collapse, the public, the police, they need someone to blame. It's just how it works. And their attention zooms in on one very obvious suspect.
And that man is Monsieur Jouvel, the brilliant chief engineer who designed the bridge. Overnight, his entire life is destroyed. He's accused of gross negligence. They say he must have cut corners on the steel or made some huge mistake in his math. The guy is facing total ruin and probably prison time.
The official investigation, which is led by this very by-the-book Inspector Béchoux, pretty much seals the deal. For Béchoux, this case is simple. It's an open and shut textbook example of engineering failure. He's just gathering paperwork, building his case against Jouvel, and he's not even considering any other possibility.
But Jouvel swears he's innocent. He knows his calculations were perfect. So in total desperation, he turns to the one man in the city who actually thrives on these kinds of impossible situations, the notoriously expensive and frankly cynical private detective, Jim Barnett.
And right here, you see this huge clash in how they work. Inspector Béchoux is a man of paper. He trusts official reports, he assumes it's human error, and he goes after the obvious guy. Barnett, on the other hand, is a man of science. He actually trusts that his client knows what he's talking about, and he goes straight to the physical evidence, looking for a truth that you're just not going to find in a stack of papers. And that's exactly what Barnett does. He goes right to the twisted, mangled wreckage of the bridge. So while Béchoux is in his office looking at blueprints, Barnett is literally climbing through debris, getting his hands dirty, examining the very steel that failed. He's looking for an answer that isn't written down anywhere.
And what do you know? Under his magnifying glass, Barnett finds the one thing everyone else missed. On the critical support beam, the one that broke, he finds these subtle but undeniable signs of chemical corrosion. The steel wasn't just overstressed, it was eaten away, weakened from the inside out. This changes everything. This was not an accident, it was murder.
And this is where you see just how diabolical the crime was. The weapon wasn't a bomb. It was a silent, slow-acting acid. The method was brilliant in its simplicity. A saboteur, probably dressed as a worker, just paints the stuff onto a critical joint weeks before the test, and that creates a ticking time bomb. The acid just invisibly eats away at the steel's integrity, so when they finally run the stress test, bam! The bridge collapses right on cue, perfectly mimicking a simple engineering failure. It's genius. So, once Barnett knew how it was done, figuring out who did it was really the next logical step. The motive? Classic industrial espionage. The culprit turned out to be Monsieur Lartigue, a rival engineer who was furious that he'd lost the bridge contract to Jouvel. And Barnett even found the smoking gun, receipts that linked Lartigue to buying the exact rare chemicals used for the sabotage.
The story ends with this amazing confrontation right there, in the middle of all the twisted steel. Barnett just lays out his entire flawless deduction, and you can just imagine Inspector Béchoux standing there totally stunned. Lartigue, completely cornered, confesses. So Jouvel's name is cleared, his reputation is saved, and Jim Barnett, he just submits his enormous invoice and walks away, proving once again he's about 10 steps ahead of the official police.
So, the case is solved, but what makes this story so great? Why do people talk about it as a masterpiece? It's more than just a clever little puzzle. Let's dig into what makes it a real classic. The story's brilliance really comes down to a few things. First, it shows us the detective as a scientist. The whole thing is solved with chemistry, not running around in disguises. The crime itself feels chillingly modern, You could totally see a case of corporate sabotage like this happening. There's also some really sharp social commentary here. The fact that the victims are just nameless workers, collateral damage in a business fight. And finally, it's just the perfect Barnett story. It shows off how cynical, brilliant, and money-driven he really is. And this quote just hits the nail on the head. This isn't a story about theatrical tricks or secret identities. It's a grounded, smart mystery that gets solved by applying real-world science and engineering. The answer was in a lab, not a costume box.
And all of this leaves us with one last, kind of creepy thought. This story does such a great job of blurring the line between a terrible accident and a perfect crime. And it really makes you wonder, how many other disasters, the ones we write off as just accidents, were actually the work of someone who was just clever enough to never get caught?